A good fishing rod is your most important tool on the water. We're going to show you today how to handle graphite rods, the difference between fiberglass and a graphite rod, and really what not to do. This is the worst case scenario, put the safety goggles on, but you definitely don't want to do this on the water. Let's go into detail of how that can stop happening. First things first, what is the difference between a graphite and a fiberglass rod? First of all, graphite rods are a lot lighter, very sensitive, and they're a high performance rod for basically any general purpose out there. But fiberglass rods do have their place. The fiberglass rods are a lot heavier, so they're a lot more durable. They are a lot more flexible, so you can bring that down to almost touch itself. The benefit of a durable rod, you can go to the other end of the spectrum, big, large trolley in those applications. You're not looking for lightweight rods, so you're able to use a fiberglass in those sort of rods, and in some instances better than graphite. The majority of rods on the market are graphite though, and it's something we're going to go through to teach you how to use and look after these rods now. The do's and don'ts of graphite fishing rods. Graphite fishing rods are quite sensitive to knocks. Whether you're hitting them over gunnels of boats, hard knocks on metal, it might not look like it's fractured, but under load, especially when you put on a big load in that section next, it's going to break in that area because they might have fractured inside the graphite. So you've got to be careful of how you carry it, how you transport it and stuff like that. The second thing you've got to watch out for is extreme angles. Graphite rods like this don't like being put around. You saw the fiberglass one before. The worst thing you can do is, if you had a fiberglass rod and you're used to it, you bend it right over, grabbing this, putting this around, and whew, bits wet everywhere. See, it doesn't take that much to break a graphite rod, but if you put this under load, we'll show you how strong they can actually be. So this is exactly the same rod you just saw me break really easy in the hand, bending that tip, but you look to this, look at the load you can put on this and how much weight you can put on it. There we go. How much you can put on that same rod, letting it have its natural curve. Don't want to lift it more than 45 degrees. So you see there, my angle at the front here, don't want to go higher than that 45 degrees. And that's got high sticking. So you can see the curve. So when we walk forward here, you see the rod starting to come back towards me, the curve angle changes, and that's got way less pressure on that rod now compared to back here. Put a lot of weight on that. Two hands, I'll go forward. Pretend that fish is under the boat now. So it's loaded up. You want to lift that in the boat, or worst case scenario, you've got a bigger fish on, and it decides to take a run, is when you load that up, things go boom. As a general rule, a lot of people that have problems with breaking rods are generally casting above the rod rating, which means two things. You could be using a heavier lure or sinker than what the rod is designed for, which puts too much pressure at the tip of the rod, and generally the breakage is around that top section from casting. It'll bend back and the sinker's a bit lagged and snap like we've shown before when you bend them over on yourself on the graphite. The other thing is if you're using line that's actually too heavy for the class of the rod. So if you've got a 20-pound rod and you're using 40-pound main line, you have the ability to break that rod if you pull it too hard. So there's a couple of things you do have to watch out for on graphite rods. A lot of people will see slight, what they think is rust in actually around the guides. And that's generally not the case. It's just a bit of grinding dust or a bit of water, a bit of salt water getting in there, because it is the weak point where the epoxy and the guide as it moves around will create a little bit of a gap where water can get in. So to stop that from happening, I've heard of people using WD and making it all shiny, that stuff like that. But the problem with that is it actually makes the epoxy coat go all matte. Doesn't have that gloss finish anymore. So it actually ruins the epoxy. Not to weaken it, but it doesn't look as good to the eye. So the best way for the maintenance is just grab a little hose here, turn it on so it's not crazy and squirting too hard to get everyone wet, and really give a rinse from the top down into that section of the guide, because that's where the water's going to come in from the weak point of it. It's not going to come up along the epoxy, it's from the top of the guide into the epoxy. So give the rod a whole rinse like that, concentrate on the tops where all those guides are. Give the reel seat here a bit of a rinse. Turn the reel seat there, just to, in case there's any fish, scales, mud, whatever underneath there. And that rod is good for another session. We've got a few different bits of equipment to keep the rods functional for as long as possible. Now there's a couple of different ways to protect the rod. We talked about before how the knocks will break these rods over time, sharp knocks, that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit of protection makes a big difference. You get things like these rod socks that go over the top there, and that protects the rod from any knocks, protects the guides from being bent a bit better, and protects your investment. This one here is one of my favourite for travelling. It's a tip protector, they call it, and it just goes over the tips because that's the most sensitive bit that will bend and break. You could put multiple rods in this one tip protector, strap them all together at the bottom, strap them here, and they all help each other to stay stronger by having this tip protector as well. Probably the only other thing that you kind of look at is on that last cast of the day, you cast out, you're an old man, so you have a hanky or tissues, and what you do is as you're winding in, hold that on the line and wipe the line down. That will keep all that goo and stuff off the line, won't get hard, which means they won't go through the runners next time and get caught, keeps the reel in better condition. That's the only other maintenance tip I would suggest when looking after your rod and line. If you treat your graphite rod correctly, you'll get years of enjoyment, but remember, it has its limits. Store it properly and use the correct techniques and you'll have a rod for life.